back to 1861 when the Civil War broke out, lasted till 1865. It was a time in our country's history that was very patriotic. It was very religious. It was also very sad. Over the course of the Civil War, which lasted just over 4 years, more men and women were killed than World War I, World War II, the Korean War, and Vietnam War combined. There were times when, in minutes, 20,000 men would fall dead on the battlefield. Our purpose is to keep history alive. We want to pass this on to our grandkids and to other school children, so whenever we get the opportunity to speak to a group, we love to do this. Like Caitlin said, Carl started first. He started about a year before me, and I just kind of dragged my feet. I'm like, I don't know, these are kind of wacky people. They dress up in these weird clothes. They sleep in a tent, and they cook over open fire, and I'm not going to do any of that. That's just not me. So gradually, I eased into it with the impression being an upper middle class lady, married to an older gentleman who was my second husband.
You didn't know that, did you?
That way, I could have clothing of nicer quality, I could have a better home, and some niceties in my home. So if we go back, Michigan became a state in 1837. Was very young when the Civil War began, actually. One of the things that Michigan soldiers heard early on was Abraham Lincoln saying, "Thank God for Michigan," because Michigan sent multiple groups into fighting for the cause. So when we get together each month with our group, and you don't just say, I'm going to reenact and just put on something and go out there. You have to join a group. There are certain rules and regulations. We are trying to be as period correct as we can be, right down to everything we wear, what we use. So over the last 14 years, I've amassed about 16 dresses. And he's got several uniforms, and then all the artifacts you see are about half of what we take with us normally when we go out in the field. And after we're finished with that, we'll have you come up, and there's many of them. I want you just to pick them up and hold that piece of history in your hands, because they go back a long time. When we get together each month with our unit, the first thing we do is we say the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. So I thought it'd be really fitting that if you're all willing to stand up, or those of you that can stand up easily, stand up and say the Pledge of Allegiance for us.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you. So before we go too far, we also wanted to honor the local Civil War veterans that are buried in the Zeeland cemetery. And even though I'm a blonde, blue-eyed Dutch girl, some of these names are really difficult for me to pronounce. So if I mess them up, just bear with me. So I got this information from the museum in the military room. They have a list of the Civil War veterans. So I hope that's accurate, because I did do a lot more research on it. So I'll just read their names, and then the companies they were with, if we knew them. We don't know all the companies. Hendrik Dahlman, no company. Josiah D. Crocker, Company F, 21st Michigan. Albert Eating, Company I, 25th Michigan. John Everhard, Company I, 25th Michigan. Henry Evers, Company I, 25th Michigan. Marinus Kossin, Hendrikus Oswalde, Peter Rokas, Rudolf Steffens, no companies. Marinus Vandeleister, Company I, 25th Michigan. Tammy Vandenbosch, Company I, 25th Michigan. Hendrik B. Van Dyke, Company I, 25th Michigan. Gerard Van Leer, no company. Cornelius Van Loo, Company F, 21st Michigan. There are also 3 names on the plaque that these gentlemen are buried. We don't know where they were buried. That's Alexander Youngkier, Company I, 25th Michigan. Garrett Van Bree, Company I, 5th Cavalry. And Dirk Keppel, Company D, 8th Michigan. And ladies and gentlemen, that's about as much as I know about the military. So I'm going to turn it over to my husband who has more knowledge in that area.
Okay. If it looks like I'm dressed kind of funny, this is the uniform that they would have for their winter weight uniform. It's also a summer weight uniform. It is 100% wool, and this jacket is lined, and I do wear it in the summertime. So the jacket is what they call a frock coat. It's 7 buttons. It has extra pockets in the back with 1 pocket in the front. The vest is personal. The government did not supply vests. So that I would have had to buy by myself. The shirt is a cotton, homespun cotton that my wife made. Normally the shirts that you get from the government were kind of about the color of the wall. Not quite white, but not quite yellow. It's just whatever they had. Undyed wool, or undyed cotton. The pants are also wool. I've got drawers underneath that actually go from my ankles all the way up to my waist. That's to keep the wool from chafing the legs. The shoes, well, we didn't call them shoes. They're not shoes. They're brogans. We've got different names for things. And they came as two brogans. You didn't get a pair. And depending on which foot you put it on, was the way you wore it. They are soft leather. It's leather uppers, leather lowers, leather heels. So to make the heels last longer, we put heel plates on them. And they're very slippery. If you ever run across dry grass in flip-flops, you know how that is? Just slide. So we put hobnails in the front. And depending on how many hobnails you put in there, it would give you traction. They also didn't last much more than 3 weeks. That's why you would wear them one way 1 week, one way the other week. Depending on how far you walk, you might just take them off, throw them over your shoulder, and carry them. You only got 2 pair a year, or unless they were really worn out quickly. You did have a cobbler along with the company that would actually fit your shoes, or fix your shoes while you were walking alongside him. He was in a wagon, he had all the stuff there, and they would actually fix your shoes while you're walking. There's different kinds of hats. This is what we would call a slouch hat. Keeps that sun off my face a little more. Otherwise, the government issue was, where'd it go? Oh, here. This is called a kepi. This is the government issue. This is what you'd wear. This would be personal, private property. The red in here is our company symbol and color. We are with the 3rd Michigan Company F. That's why the F is in there, and the horn on there means infantry. I've also got what they call a 4-button sack coat here, and a great coat. Great coat is what you wear in the winter. It actually probably weighs about 5 to 10 pounds. It's long enough to go down here, and it's got a flap you can put over your head. So that would keep you warm. That's basically what your whole uniform is. Oh, and you would have woolen socks also. I think I went through all that. Being the sergeant of the infantry is blue, by the way. Cavalry is yellow. Artillery is red. There's one other color of uniform, is green. Those are sharpshooters. Those are actually infantry sharpshooters. They had to pass a test at hitting a 4-inch circle at 250 yards consistently with a 58 caliber rifled musket. You know, everybody knows, well, the guys probably know what a musket is. You know what the difference between a smooth bore and a rifle bore is. Smooth bore, there is nothing there to guide the bullet. Rifled musket actually has a 1.5 twist in the length of the barrel. I'll give it one out. This is a 58 caliber, period correct, rifled musket. Weighs about 12 pounds. This is what the infantry would carry. They would train to shoot this thing 3 times a minute under fire, under pressure, loading a 58 caliber mini ball. This is a 1 ounce piece of lead. This one here is made for showing off. It's actually silver solder with one bottle. The smoothbore muskets would use a round ball. Now, typically what they would have, this is a 58 caliber, would fit into that gun. At the beginning of the war, they had a 69 caliber, which would take a 69 caliber bullet like this, along with 3 smaller ones called ball and buck, or buck and ball. And if you got, let's go a little bit with battle tactics. Everybody knows who Napoleon was, right? Okay, at the beginning of the battle, or at the beginning of the war, they used the Napoleonic battle tactics, which means you lined up in rows of 2, 100 yards apart. A smoothbore musket is accurate to 75 yards. When one side would fire, the other side would fire, they'd have their bayonets fixed. They'd run at each other. Well, with a rifle musket, the effective yard was 250. You could kill that 250. There is a documented case at 1,400 yards. You know what 1,400 yards is? You know what a football field is? 100 yards? 14 of football fields. So the battle tactics were really outdated by the weaponry. Really don't want to go into that a whole lot right now. But getting back to the uniform, being a first sergeant like this, I would have a different uniform than the regular soldiers. The regular soldiers carried a musket. They also carried a backpack, which is down here, a cartridge box. This holds 40 rounds of cartridges. Also, you would have a belt with your bayonet and your cap pouch. You have 40 rounds of cartridges, probably another 20 in your pockets. That's about 3 pounds of extra weight that you are carrying. Backpack weighs between 30 and 40 pounds. All the other gear you have would add to about 60 pounds. Doesn't sound bad, right? The average soldier was 5'10", 140 pounds. He's carrying half of his body weight. And you would sometimes march 5 miles a day, sometimes 25 miles a day, up to 40 miles a day, and go straight into a battle. You might start marching at 3 in the morning, and you might be able to get your tent put up by 9 o'clock at night and do it all over the next day. So battles, life was kind of rough. When you weren't fighting, your day would kind of go like this. Between 5 and 6 o'clock, you'd have a bugler going reveille. You'd have about 10, 15 minutes to get your clothes on and get in line for morning inspection. After the morning inspection, you'd have a little bit of time to make up some breakfast and eat it. You'd have 4 hours of drill. You would be either school of the soldier or military drills. And school of the soldier was mainly because farm boys didn't know their left from their right. They knew this was one way and this was the other way, but if you tell them to turn right, it'd be, nobody bothered to tell me. So we had to teach them what way to turn, when to turn, how to march, and get into battle lines, such like that. The roads back then were not like what we have now. The roads were approximately 4 men wide. So when you got into a marching someplace, you took up the whole road. There was nothing left for anybody else. So we had to teach them how to do that. We had to teach them how to load their rifle and fire different ways. You fire by company, you fire by file, you fire by front rank, rear rank, to the left, to the right. Everything had to be explained to these guys. Where do we want to go from here? This is some of the stuff that they would carry. Now, you only get 2 uniforms a year. You were responsible for every lost button, every tear. You had to keep your uniform looking good. So they didn't fix it for you. You had to learn how to sew yourself. So what they did, the wives and girlfriends would come up with what they call a housewife. This is my personal housewife. Okay, one of them. She made it for me. So. It has patches of clothing, or cloth in there, buttons, needle and thread, and there's actually just little collapsible scissors in here, along with more thread. fix it. Or if somebody else in my group would have a tear in their uniform, they didn't know how to do it, I would have to show them, and then it would be their responsibility to fix it. Other things up here are like if you wanted to shave once a week, you had to have your own shaving mirror. Now, this is a copy of a real one that you would have to buy. The government didn't issue any of this. And if you had more than 3 teeth, 4 teeth, you can't, well, actually, by the way, you had to have 4 opposing teeth to be in the Army. So there's a reason for that. But you would have a toothbrush. Now this toothbrush is made out of bone, and it's got horsehair bristles. Been used once. Never again. Also, when you got your rations for the week, or for the day, there are things that they would give you. They would give you coffee, not roasted. It's green coffee, coffee beans. You get some salt pork or salt beef, various vegetables, whatever the commissary could find at the time. It was your responsibility to cook it all. So these guys in the Army, they didn't know how to cook. They had no clue. So they'd get 3, 4, 5 guys together and, okay, you're going to make breakfast today, and you're going to make lunch, and you're going to make supper. It's like, well, what do we do? Anything you can. They had to learn what to do with flour, salt, molasses, things like that. But the Confederates weren't so lucky. They had less rations because of less availability. So 2 of the big things were the North had coffee, the South had tobacco. Both really, everybody wanted it. So when they would camp relatively close to each other, there'd be some bargaining going on. Now the guys from the North and the guys from the South, they didn't know each other. They didn't care about the war. All they knew was they were fighting. And when we were not fighting, why can't we? So they would, one of them yell across, hey, you guys got something to trade? The guy can yell back, yeah, you got tobacco? Yeah, we got tobacco. What do you got? So we got coffee. I'll be over in a minute. Well, they would trade. That was kind of ignored by the upper echelon. They didn't like it, but they weren't going to stop it. But other things up here, like this would be, that's what you cooked in. That's your frying pan. That's also your plate. Whatever you made, and you had utensils to use to eat it with. If you were really lucky, you could go to the store. Anybody know what this is?
Canteen?
Beer bottle. No, canteen is a little bit different. That's canteen. That's what you would drink your water out of, or a lot of people would put dry or cold coffee in. Then you actually get coffee in little bags. This can be your daily ration of coffee. These are whole beans. You crush them with you roast them in your frying pan and crush them with your rifle butt. And you take the grounds and you throw them in this. This is called a bucket. Half bucket, half cup. You could also make stew in it. You can do basically all your cooking in this. One of the things that I carry that the lower ones don't, is I carry a sword. The sword really isn't for fighting, it's for directions. If I'm in the front of the company of 100 men, and they're all in 4s, there's 25 rows of 4 people behind me. They can't hear me when I'm talking. Well, I want them to turn left, left turn. Right turn, forward, stop. Very simple. It's not a sharp sword. And also, I don't carry a rifle. I carry a revolver. This is mainly for if you decide to desert, I have every right to shoot you. Didn't get done very often, but they did once in a while. I have some other guns up here. If you want to come and take a look at it later. Oh yeah, I've got some statistics on battles. Real quick. Now people think that some of the battles were very short duration. 4,500 battles that they could actually name. A lot of smaller skirmishes, but some of the 10 major battles were, first one was Fort Sumter, April 12, 1861. There were no casualties. Nobody got killed, except for one Confederate horse. The first battle of Bull Run, or Manassas, now you notice there's two names for the battle. Does anybody know why there'd be two names?
The Confederates would name the battle after the river that the battle was fought by, and then the Union would name it after the town the battle was fought by.
Correct. That's why there was a lot of battles with two names. They didn't tell us that in high school, though. You learned about Bull Run and you learned about Manassas. Well, they're the same battle. The first battle of Manassas, or Bull Run, was July 21, 1861. There was 4,750 casualties. 2,700 casualties from the Union side, 2,050 from the Confederate side. It's also where Thomas Jonathan Jackson got his nickname, Stonewall. The Union got routed. It was a terrible battle. Union guys all kind of went back towards Detroit, or D.C. Washington, D.C. was only 25 miles away, so it wasn't that far. The third big battle was Shiloh or Pittsburgh Landing. That was April 6 and 7, 1862. That was 23,716 casualties. 13,047 were from the Union side, 10,669 was Confederate. And the second battle of Bull Run or Manassas was August 29 and 30 of 1862. There were 22,177 casualties, 13,824 were Union, 8,353 were Confederate. Now, Antietam and Sharpsburg were September 16 to 18, 1862, 22,717 casualties, 12,401 were Union, 10,316 were Confederate. Fredericksburg was December 11 through 15, 1862. There were 18,500 casualties, 12,500 of them were Union, 6,000 of them were Confederate. Chancellorsville, April 30 through May 6, 1863, there were 30,764 casualties, 17,304 were Union, 13,460 were Confederate. That's also where Stonewall Jackson gets shot in the arm, has his arm amputated, and about a week later he dies of pneumonia. Gettysburg, July 1 through 3, 1863, 51,112 casualties. 23,049 were Union, 28,063 were Confederate. Vicksburg was at the same time. It was a 47-day siege. It was May 18 through July 4, 1863. There were 37,273 casualties, 4,900 Union, 32,363 Confederates. The last big battle was Atlanta. That was a 40-day siege. That was July 22 through September 1, 1864. There were 9,222 casualties. 3,722 were Union, 5,500 were Confederate. At the beginning of the battle, or beginning of the war, the first major battle was Bull Run. And that happened in Wilmer McLean's front yard. Appomattox Courthouse is a town. And there's a little house there. Guess who owned it? Wilmer McLean. And they signed the surrender in his parlor. So he can rightfully say that that the Civil War started in his front yard and ended in his parlor. That's just some of the facts there. I'd like to wrap up by saying, for my part, wrap up with the Gettysburg Address. Lincoln said this on November 19, 1863. 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. We are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do so. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave their last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. And after Lincoln said that, the day after that, he said, they'll never remember this. This plow won't scour.
Okay, that's sort of the wrap up of the military. We'll kind of get to the fun stuff because the building life is going to be much more pleasant than military. And just like he showed you what he's wearing, I'm going to show you what I'm wearing. So every morning when the proper lady got up, she took off her nightgown, whatever, washed up, did her thing. Every lady, every morning, every day, wore 7 layers of clothes, no matter what the weather. 7 layers. So we start at the bottom. First, I'm going to put on my stockings and my boots. Once I have my corset on, I can't bend over very far. So, stockings and boots, then drawers or bloomers, the chemise, which is like kind of like a t-shirt type of thing, which keeps your body oil, absorbs your body oil. All these things under my skirt are white because white cotton was cheap. You can bleach it, you can hang it in the sun, it can be easily replaced. So everything underneath is white. So then we have an under petticoat, and it was also called a modesty petticoat because ladies were not allowed to show their ankle. You did not show any ankle at all, ever, under any circumstances. So if I fall, this one's going to cover my ankles because I don't want anybody to see my ankles. After that, you would put on either if you're at home, now this is a upper class, right? You would put either a hoop skirt or, in the summer, which is much cooler, it's called a crinoline cage. This lets the air circulate. And one thing I hear frequently during the summer months when we reenact is, aren't you roasting hot? You know what? Really, most of the time I am not, because everything is cotton. No polyester, no synthetic fabrics. Cotton breathes, cotton or linen. So I got my cage. Now I can put on my petticoat. If you don't wear a hoop or a cage, they would sometimes wear 4 or 5 petticoats. If you have a cage, this is going to cover, the petticoat is going to cover those lines, so you don't see those lines through my dress. So I'm up to that, and then I can finally put on my dress. They always did their hair every day. Your hair was, they called it dressed. A lady's hair never was on her neck. During the day, the ladies would wear day caps, such as this. They would make them out of lace, fabric scraps, whatever they had. My dress is a polished cotton, which is, again, a little bit more upper class than the working class of maybe what Michigan had at that time. And in this dress, there is about 10 yards of fabric total. So it's a lot of dress, but they recycled everything. So as my dress would wear out, what's going to go first is the hem, right? skirt off the bodice, flip it, and put the worn part under my bodice and still look good. So that was one way to recycle. Next, if I had a large family, and they did, they had large families back then, right? A lot of clothes to make. A private in the Civil War made $13 a month. He would send some of that home to his family to support them because they needed groceries and, well, fabric, right? So I have $13 a month to clothe. Well, in real life, I have 5 children. So we'll say I have 5 children to clothe and myself on $13 a month. When my dress was worn out, there's so much fabric. I can easily make a dress for one of my daughters. I can make a skirt for my daughter. I can make a shirt for my son. And back then, it wasn't that boys wore blue and girls wore pink. It was actually the other way, and they wore whatever they had, to tell you the truth. Once my dress was worn out, I've made clothes for my children. You still have fabric. You make doll clothes, rag dolls. You break that fabric down further, use it for rags. Everything was used and never just thrown out. They did a great job at recycling. So once I'm dressed, I'm going to stay home today. So I'm putting on my chatelaine. And an interesting fact, if any of you have watched Downton Abbey, Mrs. Hughes, the housekeeper on Downton Abbey, always has her chatelaine on. They put that on in the morning when they're going to be at home because if I'm going to do any sewing, knitting, anything like that, I got a scissors to snip the threads. I have this little guy to wind the thread around, or yarn around. But the most valuable thing on my chatelaine is this key. This key does not unlock my front door, does not unlock my back door. What it unlocks is my spice cabinet. Spices came a long distance, especially from, say, China to Michigan. So I lock up my spice cabinet because I don't want my children getting in my spices. And heaven forbid that nosy lady next door comes over and helps herself to some of my tea. So I have it locked up, and this is how tea came in the 1860s, in a block. You would scrape some up, put it in your tea strainer, heat up your water, have a cup of tea. Sometimes in the winter, it gets really cold and we didn't have central heating back then. So, being the knitter and sewer that you had to be at that time, I would make some of these. They are like a sweater. This is silk and wool combined. And what you can do, you've got these big puffy sleeves. You just open this up. Button doesn't work real good. And to keep my arms warm, I would put this on. It's like having a sweater right against you. Button the sleeves, you don't even know I have it on, but it does keep me very warm. And again, this is I made these with silk and wool yarn. So that is very period correct fabric. Another thing that they did, because they got cold again, they would knit themselves petticoats. This one is partly wool, and it took me about a year to make it. You make it on, anybody's a knitter, on size 3 needles. So little teeny toothpick needles almost. And they knit their designs into it. But again, you put this one in place of the modesty petticoat, and it keeps you really like wearing a blanket around you when you sit down. Along the lines of sewing, about beginning of the Civil War, maybe just a year or two earlier, they came out with sewing machines, which greatly helped the ladies that were sewing. They didn't have to sew the clothes by hand if they could afford it. For $5, you could get something like this. This is not a child's sewing machine. This is an actual sewing machine. It is now 161 years old.
Wow.
Up till 2 weeks ago, it was in perfect working order, and it's a hand crank. What happens, that guides the needle, right? You crank it and it guides the needle. You put your fabric in there. What happened 2 weeks ago is I'm busily sewing on it. All of a sudden, it made a horrible clump, and teeth, the gears, bunch that much, flew out. So we're right now looking for someone, and we may have found someone to take this part apart to see if you can build a new gear, because it's patented 1860. It's all original, other than one gear needs to be replaced. So imagine going from hand sewing to having a sewing machine, which does marvelous time. And this does not have a bobbin. It has a chain stitch. So pretty soon you come up and look at it, and it forms a chain. If you cut that chain in the wrong spot, the whole seam rips off. And I have done that repeatedly. I don't forget about it. So if I were going to go out to town to visit, anything else, I would put on my shawl, and you never went out without a bonnet. They wanted to be pale as they could be. I don't know if I can get this on over top of everyone, but this was made for me by one of our fellow reenactors. It's 100% silk. So you put that on, you went out to town, you put on your bonnet, you covered your hands, you carried a purse in which you always had a handkerchief because the smells were bad for horses outside. And you could carry a little money. They called these reticules, which in French means ridiculous, because you can't hardly get anything in it. A little bit of money and maybe a handkerchief, and that's about it. That's all that fits in there. So a couple things in my home that I have. I kind of divided this by rooms. So this is kind of my parlor. I have this really nice, it's called a sugar, cream, and berry set. You put your berries in here, your cream, your sugar, nice afternoon repast. When I told you about the tea, that tea cup and saucer, the tea strainer where you put your shavings of tea into. If it's warm, always have a fan, private air conditioner here, you know, I'm never hot. I can't quite reach it, but the white candle is Civil War era. This candle is actually Revolutionary War. They both serve the same purpose. They're called courting candles. Back in the day, in the 1860s, you didn't date, you courted. A gentleman would come to call on the lady of his choice, and they would never be alone, they would be in the parlor, the parents would be there. And if the dad looked at this guy and went, I don't think I want him with my daughter, he would turn this way down. That gentleman had to leave when the wick got down to the plate. If he thought that this was a possibility for a son-in-law, he'd crank it up higher. Then he could stay longer. Well, this would have been really good for our two daughters. Sometimes we wondered, So things in my bedroom, kind of right here. This thing is very heavy. It's called a pig. And what you did was you fill it with hot water. You can put it under your bed. You can put it between your sheets. You can put it in your carriage. Warms it up. Every lady of means, and I think even some of the underprivileged, would have this little beauty. Top comes off with a hole in. First time I saw it, I thought, what the heck would they do that with a hole? It's a hair receiver. They would brush their hair each day. They'd brush their children's hair. They would put that into here, and once it was full, they would make what they called a rat, which was just to increase the volume of hair that they had.
Oh.
So again, recycling. I got this little beauty. She sits there on my dresser and is full of nicely scented lavender powder. Because you know, they didn't bathe every day. And then she just needed that. And this little cutie. When I say to my school children, I say, what do you think this is? And they go, it's a neti pot. Pretty close. It's a gravy bowl. Nope, you're both wrong. You know, Michigan was rural, a lot of our country was rural. Moms had to be the doctor and the nurse when your children and your friends got sick. So this was a way of giving the patient the whoever was ill, filling it with tea, broth, whatever, while they're in bed. Because if you were sick, you were put to bed, mom would put you to bed for at least a week, 10 days. But you still had to have sustenance. So they could do this, and as you're laying in bed, they can pour that into your throat. I guess it could be a neti pot. So then we're kind of moving, in my bedroom, of course, I always, say to the kids, 1860s, you didn't have a bathroom, and they're all like, oh, what did you do? Well, under your bed, you have the chamber pot. Some women of really high class would have their chamber pot the same pattern as all their china.
Oh.
So I'm told that if there was, say, 5 people in the house and you had 2 chamber pots, the youngest child in the morning had the responsibility of taking the chamber pot and emptying it out back. So I always say to the school kids, who's the youngest in your family? And they're like, why? Because the youngest one had to empty it. So, then I have some things in my kitchen. Because I have some money, I have hired help. I don't have to really cook. I know what it's used for. One thing, again, that I keep under lock and key along with my tea is sugar. So sugar came quite often in a cone. And because it came so far and you wanted to preserve it, it came wrapped in wax paper, and you just chip a little bit off as you need it, add it to your baking or to your teacup. And after looking, there are vendors that sell you things that are period correct that you can add to your collections, right? And so one day I said to Carl, I need a sugar thing. I didn't know what to call it, sugar cone. He's like, oh. So we looked it up, and he actually made this nearly 5 years ago. It isn't moldy, it has not changed in texture. You can still scrape it off and use it just as if it was made yesterday. And that's how they preserve their sugar. A lot of us have blenders and mixers and food processors. Well, the 1860s version of all that is right here in this bowl. If I want to mash anything, mashed potatoes, anything, I've got a masher. Also works good to discipline children if they're out of hand. Gently, of course. A whip. A scoop, if I have to scoop out the flour. And my measuring spoons. Works just as good as your modern day food processor.
Your spoon's wood?
Yes. The last thing I really want to show you here is this little beauty. And if you had like a formal dinner and you wanted your table to look really pretty, you would put your sugar, your granulated sugar, in one like this. And I haven't polished it because I'm afraid it would take away from how it looks. This is a sugar shaker for your dining.
Oh my God.
So that kind of wraps up, and once we're finished, we really would like you guys to come up. Most things can be picked up and held. I want you to pick something up that looks attractive to you. Hold a little piece of history in your hands. Think about the people that use these objects before us. Each time I sit down with my hand crank machine, I wonder how many ladies sewed for their children on there. How many guys tried it? Carl's wanting to try it.
I've got my own.
So we want you to really experience holding some of this, looking at it. We'll do some questions and try to answer them. We're not experts. There's always more to be learned. We get our information primarily from researching, reading. Ken Burns' Civil War series by PBS is an excellent, excellent series. The movie Glory talks about the 54th Massachusetts, how they charged a fort and their whole regiment was killed as they charged the fort. It just gives you goosebumps. Gettysburg, the movie, Gods in General, which is like a prequel to Gettysburg.
Right.
So some of those, I know there's a lot of them are not easily accessible, but if any of you ever want to borrow them, call us. We have watched Ken Burns, I think, a dozen times. And each time I'm like, I don't remember that from last time, or I didn't remember this. And then to see the movies where you see the actors portraying the part, you have to take it with a grain of salt because they were made in the 90s, so a lot more information has come out as far as being correct with your clothing and everything. But it really gives you a sense of being there and understanding what a critical time in our country's history this was, and how devastating it was to the families at home when they didn't know if their husbands and fathers were alive or not. The only communication route they had then was, the mail and letters, and that was iffy at best. But these gentlemen and the ladies were very eloquent in their letters. And so I have one to share with you. I just have to get my hanky out because even though I've read this letter probably 100 times, it never ceases to touch me emotionally and just makes me think of all that suffering that they did. I read that letter. Just bear with me if I don't quite make it through. But I have my black lace handkerchief, right? I'm ready for it. The last letter from Major Sullivan Ballou, written to his wife leading up to the battle at First Bull Run, or Manassas. It's 2 names. Headquarters, Camp Clark, Washington, D.C., July 14, 1861. My very dear wife, indications are very strong that we shall move in a few days, perhaps tomorrow. Lest I should not be able to write you again, I feel impelled to write a few lines that may fall under your eye when I shall be no more. Our movement may be one of few days in duration and full of pleasure, and it may be one of severe conflict and death to me. Not my will, but thine, O God, be done. If it is necessary that I should fall on the battlefield for any country, I am ready. I have no misgivings about or lack of confidence in the cause in which I am engaged, and my courage does not halt or falter. I know how strongly American civilization now leans upon the triumph of government, and how great a debt we owe to those who went before us through the blood and suffering of the Revolution. And I am willing, perfectly willing, to lay down all my joys in this life to help maintain this government and to pay that debt. But, my dear wife, when I know that with my own joys I lay down nearly all of yours and replace them in this life with care and sorrows, when, after having eaten for long years the bitter fruit of the orphanage myself, I must offer it as their only sustenance to my dear little children. Is it weak or dishonorable, while the banner of my purpose floats calmly and proudly in the breeze, that my unbounded love for you, my darling wife and children, should struggle in fierce though useless contest with my love of country? I cannot describe to you my feelings on this calm summer night, when 2,000 men are sleeping around me, many of them enjoying the last, perhaps that before that of death, and I, suspicious that death is creeping behind me with his fatal dart, am communing with God, my country, and thee. I have sought most closely and diligently, and often in my breast, for a wrong motive in hazarding the happiness of those I love, and I could not find one. A pure love of my country and of its principles I have advocated before the people in the name of honor that I love more than I fear death, have called upon me, and I have obeyed. Sarah, my love for you is deathless. It seems to bind me with mighty cables that nothing but omnipotence can break. And yet my love of country comes over me like a strong wind and bears me irresistibly on with all those chains to the battlefield. The memories of all those blissful moments I have spent with you come crowding over me, and I feel most deeply grateful to God and to you that I have enjoyed them for so long. And how hard it is for me to give them up and burn to ashes the hopes of our future years when, God willing, we might have still lived and loved together and seen our boys grow up to honorable manhood around us. I know I have but few claims upon divine providence, but something whispers to me. Perhaps it is the wafted prayer of my little Edgar that I shall return to my loved ones unharmed. If I do not, my dear Sarah, never forget how much I love you, nor that when my last breath escapes me on the battlefield, it will whisper your name. Forgive my many faults and the pains I have caused you, how thoughtless, how foolish I have oftentimes been. How gladly would I wash out with my tears every spot upon your happiness and struggle with all the misfortune of this world to shield you and my children from harm. But I cannot. I must watch you from the spirit land and hover near you while you buffet the storms with your precious little freight and wait with sad patience until we part to meet no more, till we meet to part no more. But oh, Sarah, if the dead can come back to this earth and flit unseen around those they love, I shall always be near you. I will be near you in the garish day and in the darkest night, amidst your happiest scenes and your gloomiest hours, always, always. And if the soft breeze fans your cheek, it shall be my breath, or if the cool air cools your throbbing temples, it shall be my spirit passing by. Sarah, do not mourn me, dear. Think I am gone, and wait for me, for we shall meet again. As for my little boys, they will grow as I have done, and never know a father's love and care. Little Willie is too young to remember me long, and my blue-eyed Edgar will keep my frolics with him among the dimmest memories of his childhood. Sarah, I have unlimited confidence in your maternal care and your development of their characters. Tell my two mothers, I call God's blessing upon them. Oh, Sarah, I wait for you there. Come to me and lead thither my children. Sullivan. Sullivan wrote this letter, went into the Battle of Bull Run and was mortally wounded, and died a week later at the age of 32. And I think that to have that letter is a good reminder of the love that these people had for each other, the hard times they went through, that they came out strong. So that's our program. What we're going to do is pull this little table forward. I'd like you to come up and take a look at some of these things, pick them up, hold that little bit of history.